Welcome to What Scale When, where you'll learn how to find guitar scales in a piece of music. My name is Peter Koppes and I'm an international recording and touring musician who has also taught music at college level. Scales are single note sequences that are like the code of music, like DNA, and they change sometimes. This is a chord chart with 4 chords from a very famous song, and underneath it are the scales that change slightly for each of the chords. I will demonstrate them with a simple solo over a backing track video. You will notice that the scale diagrams are on the top of the screen on the high strings only, and the chord changes will be at the bottom of the screen. That was easy to do after using this new method, which doesn't require music theory knowledge, and easy if the major or minor chord at the beginning of a song doesn't suit the scale with the same name, and if the scale changes in the piece. It's easy to find scales by ear if they are based on the modes. Next are 7 short lessons to learn how, and they're only on the E and B strings for simplicity, and one note is missing from the full scale, which is not important at this stage. Then you'll be able to jam along with other musicians and write song melodies too. To find the scale position, first match the letter name of the beginning chord of the piece with its root note on the high E string, as in this fretboard diagram. Depending if the starting chord is minor or major, a box pentatonic shape is formed on 2 strings up or down from the root note. More notes will be added later, and here are some examples for A minor chord and a C major chord. The box pentatonic for a piece beginning with an A minor chord. It only has 4 notes and extends up the fretboard from the root note on the high E string. Now a solo demonstration over the backing track video. The box pentatonic scale for a piece beginning with a C major chord. It has only 4 notes and extends down the fretboard from the root note on the high E string. The notes are the same as the A minor box pentatonic and called relative. Now a solo demonstration. A box pentatonic shape can usually continue for the next chords in a piece, but there are exceptions for a special major chord called a major fifth. If encountering a special major fifth chord when you're using a minor box pentatonic, it needs a slight modification by moving the top note on the B string up by 1 fret for that chord. The box pentatonic scale for the special E major fifth chord in a piece usually beginning with an A minor chord. The video starts on an E major fifth chord, then changes to an A minor chord, which is usually the starting chord. If using a major box pentatonic and a special major chord is encountered, it is called a major 3, and the scale is also slightly modified by moving the top note of the B string up, shifting it up by 1 fret for that chord. The box pentatonic scale for the special E major 3 chord in a piece usually beginning with a C major chord. This relative version is common, as in Creep by Radiohead. The video begins with an E major 3 chord, then changes to a C major chord, which is usually the starting chord. There's another type of exception for very special major chords. Limbo is an invented name for these scales because various choices may be available. The following examples are in A major for a chord that would normally be an A minor. The major 5th Limbo Box basic scale for a very special A major 5th chord in a piece usually with a C major chord or beginning with a very special A major chord. Again, this is a slightly modified A minor box pentatonic scale, but this time the top note on the E string is shifted up by 1 fret. The video starts with an A major 5th chord, which could be the starting chord, and then changes to a C major chord, which is common. But sometimes a minor box pentatonic scale needs to be modified on both the E and B strings for a very special major chord. The other major limbo box basic scale, if a very special A major chord is not a major 5th, in a piece usually with a C major chord or beginning with a very special A major chord. The top notes of a box pentatonic on the E and B strings are both moved up by 1 fret. The video starts on an A major chord, which could be the starting chord, and changes to a C major chord, which is quite common. Now more of the scale can be found by adding an extra note to each string inside the box pentatonic. They are like modes, but one note is missing. That's not important. The 3 possible variations of notes added to an A minor box pentatonic in a piece beginning with an A minor chord. Guitar modes are better for folk and rock music because often the starting chord is not the same name as the correct major or minor scale that are hard to figure out. The video begins with an A minor chord and the A Aeolian box mode, the most common, and changes to a C major chord with the relative mode. This video begins with an A minor chord and a Dorian box mode that is common in Santana's music, and then changes to a C major chord with its relative mode. One note might sound slightly wrong at first, then magically sound fine as the change of mode takes hold. This video begins on an A minor chord with a Phrygian box mode, which is often used in Spanish sounding music, and includes a C major chord with its relative mode. The three possible variations of notes added to a C major relative box pentatonic scale in a piece beginning with a C major chord. Exceptions for special major chords are shown later. This video begins with a C major chord and the very common Ionian box mode, and includes an A minor chord with its relative mode. This video starts with a C major chord and the not so common Lydian box major, as in Man on the Moon by REM, and includes the A minor chord with its relative mode. One note might sound slightly wrong at first and then magically sound fine as the change of mode takes hold. This video begins on a C major chord with a Mixolydian box mode, very common in rock music, and changes to an A minor chord with its relative mode. Aeolian and Dorian box modes can often continue for a whole piece, although there is a common exception if encountering a special major fifth chord. The two variations of notes added to the minor box pentatonic scale for a special E major fifth chord in a piece usually beginning with an A minor chord. These are the slight modifications of the two box modes, with the B string top note being shifted up by one note, by one fret. The video, this solo, will be the slight modification of the Aeolian box mode for the major fifth chord, and it will start on an E major chord that changes to an A minor chord, which is often the starting chord. This solo has the slightly modified Dorian box mode for the special major fifth chord as in Oye Como Va by Santana. The video starts on an E major fifth chord, then changes to an A minor chord, which is usually the starting chord. Ionian and Lydian box modes can usually continue for a whole piece, but one common exception is encountering a special major 3 chord. The two variations of notes added to the box pentatonic scale for a special E major 3 chord in a piece usually beginning with a C major chord. These are also slight modifications of the two box modes on the B string by shifting the top note up by 1 fret. This solo has the slightly modified Ionian box mode for a special major 3 chord. The video begins on an E major 3 chord and changes to a C major chord, which is usually the starting chord. This solo has the slightly modified Lydian box mode for a special major 3 chord, and the video begins on a E major 3 chord, then changes to a C major chord, which is usually the starting chord. There's another type of exception for scales continuing in a piece, and it's for very special major chords. Limbo is an invented name for these scales because choices may be available. This time, the box mode is slightly modified, with the top note on the E string being shifted up 1 note, and sometimes the B string as well. There are 4 variations, and the following examples are for A major, which would normally be an A minor. The first 2 variations of notes added to the Limbo Box basic scale for a very special A major chord, which could also be the beginning chord. Mixolydian is the most common mode, and the video has an A major dominant chord, which could also be the starting chord. The scale usually reverts immediately afterwards to a normal box mode, and in this case often a C major chord with an Lydian mode or an Ionian mode. If the very special major chord is not a dominant chord, the box mode is slightly modified on both the E and B strings with the top notes shifted up by 1 fret. The solo is an A major chord that could also be the starting chord, and the scale reverts usually immediately afterwards to a normal box mode that would have a C major chord often in the Lydian or Ionian mode. The other two variations of notes added to a limbo box basic scale for a very special major A chord, which could also be the beginning chord. These scales are when an Aeolian or Phrygian box mode needs to be slightly modified for a very special major chord, and the top note on the E string is shifted up by 1 fret. The solo is the A major 5th chord, which could also be the starting chord, and in this case it would revert immediately afterwards to an Aeolian box mode. This solo has an A major 5th chord that could also be the starting chord. The scale usually reverts immediately after to a Phrygian box mode. Lastly, the blues rock approach for pieces beginning with one very special major chord but using the minor box pentatonic scale and bending the E string for one wrong note to bring it into tune. This is the blues box pentatonic scale for A major with an arrow showing the bend. The major blues box pentatonic scale is often used for rock guitar solos instead of the major 5th limbo box basic scale. This solo has the A major dominant 7 chord. Now you can jam along and discover scales for chord progressions in a piece of music. Just begin with a box pentatonic scale and identify any slight modifications for special major chords. Then inside the box, add one note to each string and you'll find more of the scale or mode. It's easy.